Professor, can we get started? We have participants who have joined in already.
Absolutely. I think we should do that. Huh?
Yeah.
So would you start, Mr. Venkatesh, or shall I begin?
Would you like to introduce her, or do you want me to?
Yeah, I'll do that. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and good afternoon, good morning, wherever you're joining in from. So welcome to this particular session as part of our series called Top Information Systems Publications from India, which means from India-based authors. And this particular series is to celebrate the success stories from India-based authors in top-tier journals, so which means publications in the senior scholar IS journals or in the Nifty 50 journals. Right? And this is the sixth episode of that. And for today, we have Professor Ayushi Tandon, who is currently working in Dublin, but when she published her ISR, she was based out of India. And so we own that as an India-based paper, and we are glad to have her today for this seminar. And the paper is very interesting. It talks about how does Rivals information expertise help you with your online engagement. So I couldn't get much of that paper. I'm hoping we'll get to learn from her. So Dr. Professor Ayushi, welcome for this session. And as I said, while you talk about the paper and its publication journey, will be nice if you can also share with us your experience of handling the review process. I'm sure you might have got several competing reviewers' expectations as well. So how did you kind of navigate that to get into ISR? Right. So please help us with that learning process as well. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Mayank, and thank you, Balakrishna, for arranging this session. I'll share my screen and I'll request you all to confirm if the things are visible fine.
It's visible, Professor. If you go full screen. It's perfect.
It's visible? Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks, Professor Mayank, for being kind and sharing the opportunity of presenting my work to everyone. And thanks for everyone who is joining in. And as Professor Mayank has rightly pointed out, the session duration was 1.5 hours, and I don't want to present one paper for 1.5 hours. So I've in fact tried weaving this in terms of a storyline of my research work. I'll try to talk about the fallacies and challenges that I faced in between, and then we can take up questions. I'm happy to answer the question, happy to listen to your research interest around this, or if you have anything under revision and resubmit or something like that in the similar line, I'll be happy to take that up and discuss that also. So the first slide is the title of the paper, which was the title of the presentation announcement, which is the title of the ISR paper. But I have been working with this team, which is having Professor Swanand Deodar. He was my thesis advisor also, but this is not my thesis work. It is my segue into the experimental research. My dissertation was actually from IIM Ahmedabad, qualitative ethnography. So you can see the challenges that I face ontologically and epistemologically, also working in the quant positivist space and also doing the ethnographic research. I'm happy to talk about that also. But largely, my research empirical context has been health technology and education technology, which is what you will see. And the outcome that I'm interested in from IS perspective is user engagement with the digital platform. The works which I'll be presenting here with this team of Swanand, and then we have two practitioners who have developed the mobile applications which we've used for research. And I often try to talk about this research also in terms of how do we collaborate with practitioners. One thing that I would say at the outset is always beneficial to have the practitioners as co-authors in collaborators if possible, because then they also have a stake. So if we have any practitioner listening, I'd love to hear on later on hear their views also on this, because in my view, I always keep practitioners as my co-authors, which helps in revision and which was an important part of we being able to address a revise and resubmit this paper and other papers which are part of this presentation in a whole series. So to tell you all about the broader interest, as I said, I was interested in user engagement and I'm still interested in user engagement. In the time when the world is getting there's attempt to provide internet access as a human right in some way to each and every one. We have at present 73.2% of global population, which is a huge number of people who have access to the internet and are in some way active internet user. That's information from Statista 2025. And then there are the users who are outside the internet also. So that means user engagement is a topic which has been of interest to the marketing researchers, to the organizational behavior researchers, human resource researchers. So you have the theories and findings from all of these streams of management. Within that, there's one established thing that when brands, like in marketing, they invest in user engagement, it leads to increase in the revenue. It also leads to increase in the user engaging with their platforms or their products. And also user engagement has social benefit because more people engage, it creates a larger community. Within this physical user engagement, we segue towards the digital user engagement. And then comes a digital platform. A very basic understanding of digital platform is it's something like a space which connects the multiple users. We tend to call one end of the users or one type of user as supplier and other type of users as a consumer of the user. But basically, it's just a platform which is connecting the multiple users. And largely digital platforms, until it's a job platform and you're doing a job on online space, the things are often voluntary. So user have a freedom to join the platform, what time they will do, to what extent they will do. There are things about autonomy, but we can still say that users have autonomy around these aspects, like whether someone would use Ola or Uber or any other new platform in India to book the cabs or any other place. That's the kind of freedom people have. So that's the thing of the digital platform. So that means for digital platform developers, it always makes sense to understand the user participation to maintain more users, which is often called as ensuring that there's a network advantage. Coming to user engagement in the digital space, which is also an online space, researchers before me, I was interested in this space, and researchers before me have studied user engagement. So then back in 2017 or 2016 end, I started looking at the research in this space and I found out that yes, there are different aspects of user engagement on online space which researchers are studying across the globe, like many digital platforms which provide the hotel or stay places, reviews were coming in. There were forums which provide the coding related help to the people. There were online review platforms around the books. There were online platforms on OTT consumptions like Netflix. There are platforms like Spotify where people do listen to the music and then they comment about it. They share what they're listening. So there has been a huge interest in understanding two things: antecedents of user engagement and the consequences. Consequences are largely determined in terms of how much people engage with it. And that's where a nuance will come in the later slide, which also drove my interest in this whole space. But the researchers have been interested in understanding the user engagement antecedents and then the consequences, which are economical. In fact, what I found interesting by reviewing this paper was it's not just the online consequences. It's not just that reading the online reviews would lead people to engage with that ebook. Rather, people are buying that book physically, or user generated content online in a digital space has implications in the physical space where people are buying automobiles, reading the review, which is a huge investment from a personal point of view. So that means the user content which gets online and the kind of user content people engage with has implications in has economic implications for the digital space and also the physical space. And this makes understanding online user engagement interesting. So that was my first interest in the space. And as I mentioned, I was interested in education technology besides the health tech, and I got the opportunity to do the research. So this is in this series my first paper, which is not an ISR paper, it's a TBIT paper, but I do like to mention and share about it. This paper tried finding its home in MISQ. After the one round of revision, it was rejected. So happy to talk about it, happy to own that it takes time for papers to succeed. But often you should own and you should feel good about the research. And I really feel good about this paper of mine also, especially because of the implications in the practice space it has. So this is a paper about understanding the antecedents of user engagement, particularly in terms of social information signals that drive the user engagement. And this is also an experiment-based study. Now, till now, when I was mentioning the user engagement, you would hear that I'm telling that writing online reviews or reading online reviews or buying something or saying that I'll buy something later is also an online user engagement. But all of these engagements have a hierarchy, which is something very beautiful. Singer and Zalman's paper highlight about hierarchy of user engagement or ladder of user participation. And that plays an important role in setting the hook for this paper. So that means in the online space, people are having a hierarchical level of consumption. Simply to say, there are some people who will write the review. So they are content generators. And then the researchers are interested in what drives them to generate that content. But then there are people who would listen and read to that content consumption. And then there's research around that, but a limited research around the content consumption because it's difficult to trace that. And then there are some people who will create a playlist or say they will watch this later or buy this later. This is a space where there is still limited amount of research. Creating a digital artifact, that means creating your playlist to consume that content later, a content organization. So this content consumption and content organization, which was more or less studied around 2017 and 2018, interested me. And that's where the user engagement part of one of this research in the SPART series is based. And when we were trying to look at this user engagement in content consumption and content organization, we found that the social information, that is information which comes from others and about others, which has some social element in it, has shown to drive the content generation. But what happens in terms of content consumption and content organization? Within this, we found competing evidence, particularly in allied disciplines and some in IS area also, where the scholars were saying that people would be interested in following what others are consuming because it gives a sense of information and direction. But then there is another research which says that no, the social information about other would not drive people to engage with that content, rather do something else because they want to be different. There are other idiosyncrasies around that. So there's a competing understanding of how social information about others would drive the engagement. And that became first research question of the series, that does social information drive content consumption and organization in the digital platform? And we were looking at the two aspects of this. When you provide information about the others, which we call a social information signal, you can tell that others are also doing this. That means peer action. They are commonly viewing this particular dress that you're or t-shirt that you're looking online, or this is recommended by expert for you, or this is recommended by expert as a current online trend. Might sound familiar to some of you, and both of these are different. One is having a peer influence, another is some way the recommendation coming from the expert. And then what user can do? User can engage with that, buy that product immediately, or say, no, I'll buy it later and I'll look around it. Translating this to the empirical context which we had access to a mobile application which provides the word list for GRE and other preparation. Barron's word list might sound familiar to many of you, which for a long time was a standard in GRE word preparation, and there are many apps around that. This was an app which was word and sentence, and there they were giving this Barron's 300, 800 and a complete word list for for users to engage with that word list and consume the content or create their own list, as you can see on screen. So we decided to do first experiment with this app. And what we did, we made the change in the platform, which is consistent across all the studies and ISR paper also that I'll be talking about. So we added the two type of information signaling across the two different groups. So one goes as a platform where to the new users where they don't see any such information signaling. But other groups, as you can see, is on the left and your right of a screen. On the left, it's commonly viewed by others, peer action information, randomly put on some words. In the another group, it's expert recommendation, randomly put on some words. So if you are installing an app, you're a new user, either you would be into the control group, or you will be in the peer action group, or you're in expert recommendation group. Something very standard for conducting online digital experiments. You do randomization, and then you try to capture the data. You try to establish, which is an important part for many papers, which is where when I review paper, I see people often do sort of a mistake, or they miss out, or there's a thought process which is required. That how do we establish the randomization? How many questions a reviewer can ask, anyone can ask, that people across these three groups or four groups are similar? You can say that they are randomized. And that's where a pre-survey data of a user often helps, which is what we also did. The user can be categorized, or user can be differentiated on the basis of their gender, age, the purpose for which they are consuming this mobile application. What is their English proficiency? What is their motivation? Are they there to compete or there to learn? So this in some way covers large part of the literature. There's another thing also, technology proficiency of the users. Are the user across the three platform equally proficient in technology, which we didn't capture, which goes as limitation in this paper. But if you see that there are different aspects that we thought of and captured, and we showed the randomization across this. But for that, what we did, we collected the data on the basis of survey, and then we also collected the data of the user engagement with this platform with different words and different sentences. So we had the data for every user, a user panel, on what they did, how much time they spent, that means how much content they were exposed to, how much scrolling they did they view the sentence, did they added a particular word to the list. So basically, did they consume the content or they organize the content, our dependent variable. And then the independent variable come whether that word was treated. That means whichever group they were into, peer or expert, whether in that group they received that information signal or social information signal for that particular word. So this was a basic structure of this. I can get into more detail, but I'm keeping this particular paper short and trying to move towards the another paper. So that's where you will see a bit of rush with this paper. But this is when we collected the data around this and we analyzed, what we found was something very interesting, at least for us and for the practitioners with us, that peer action, which is others have done this, others have viewed this. That also becomes important. Our signal was commonly viewed by others, as you can see, drove people to consume the content. Similarly, expert recommendation drove people to consume the content. But we didn't see any significant effect of these information signals on the content organization. That means adding to the list. So in some way, these user engagements are hierarchical. So we are contributing by showing that, yes, the outcomes when previous work is talked about are hierarchical. That means they would have differential drivers in terms of user engagement. And it's important to understand that. So in some way, there's a boundary condition in terms of what type of user engagement a particular information signal can drive. We went on doing the follow-up study, and when we found that when we give both signals together, that means a word gets peer and expert recommendation both, more stronger signal that you should consume it. It affects content consumption. But again, content organization was hitting the limit of boundary condition. But then on the reviewer suggestion, we changed the information signal of commonly viewed by others to commonly added by others, a very directed action of others. And that is where we found that it started affecting content organization decision also. So that means signal and signaling framing and information about others has implication. If you want people to engage in higher order or have a higher order of user engagement, we need to formulate and think about our signals also in the similar manner. So this was in some way the contribution of this work, that we teased out distinction between content consumption and organization. We said that a more stronger or selective signals are required for higher order of user engagement. Now, the reviewer and review process, you can see that there's a follow-up study required. Rather, there are two follow-up study required. So one challenge we would have faced if we would have not been working with the practitioners is to execute the follow-up study. But since practitioners were working with us, they were the authors, we were able to relatively easily execute the design which was recommended by the reviewers, make changes, and collect the data, which was an ask and which often becomes important in papers which go into the top journals. Either you have large data, which is convincing for the reviewers in the first hand, but in my experience, I've often found that reviewers, especially in the experimental study, when they are convinced with the basic findings, they'll come back to you and ask you about extending that study or doing alternative operationalization of something in the study. And if you can execute that, that makes it easy for you to convince that this paper is worth publishing. So plan for that also. So my learning was I need to plan for randomization very well. I need to look for theoretical implications, and I also need to, which was a weak part of this paper, and I also need to, which led to rejection in MISQ, and I also need to look for whether I would be able to do a follow-up study, do a follow-up ask from the reviewers if there is things like that. And that becomes important in my future research planning, which is often I tell my students and colleagues also. Now, after we are done with study, we learn something in our way relevant. We learned that information about others, yes, social information signal is driving user engagement, but we are studying one platform, one type of context. Is the information signaling uniform across all other context and things like that? And that way we were interested into competitive environment and competitive platforms. This is where our second study, which is an ISR paper, comes into picture. You can scan the QR code to read the paper. If you do not have complete access, you can drop me an email. I can share the paper with you. But talking about this paper and how we have situated this. So again, now we started looking at what are the previous studies drivers of user engagement and how they vary across the different platform in a way people have theorized these mechanisms. So first thing we looked at that most of the papers look at e-commerce or social commerce type of platforms, which is different from competitive settings. And we also found that most of these papers are saying that these information signals or information about others are contextual. That means what drives user engagement in a dating platform will not drive the user engagement from the people in e-commerce platform. Makes sense. That means there is a less studied platform, which is competitive settings at that time. So what drives user engagement in uh, e-commerce platform should not be driving similarly user engagement in competitive settings. Or at least that makes it open space for us to study. But in the competitive settings also, information about others and others in competitive settings are your rival should play an important role. So what is the information about others which are available as a research in various social media and e-commerce platform? How many people have downloaded this software or others who have read this book? How many people have liked this image on Instagram? How many people have commented on it? And then there is a descriptive feedback about the people from the people about the product, or just a very discrete signaling that this is a 5-star or a 4-star thing, or this is good but it needs to improve. There's information signaling like targeted messages, or there's signaling like where it's shooted out to the people in the bulk. So there's large amount of research which is happening, but again most of these is happening in social media platform and e-commerce. And we looked at it, we found that the mechanisms which researchers are saying underlying these engagement and the drivers of engagement is either social contagion, like a follower effect. One has done, the others would follow that or not follow that precedence, or the e-commerce setting and things like that around the norm. It's this buying this kind of product is norm, or it's normative and I want to be different. But underlying mechanism remains the social contagion and social norm, which shouldn't be the case in the competitive settings, because competitive settings are different from social media platform. If I am liking a picture online, or if I am consuming a video online, it's available for other people also to consume. It's not a zero-sum game. But if you are in a competitive setting, if you're playing a game against someone, if you're competing other rivals, then it becomes a zero-sum game. You either win or lose. And then the information that is available about the others is relevant or should be relevant as we have looked the literature in the offline space. But what happens in the online space and what kind of information? So one information which we found, especially in the gaming space, basketball, and many other games on which research has been done, is about information about your rivals or opponents' expertise. And then also there are competing findings. Some studies have said that when your rival is expert, people are psyched up and then they engage more and put more effort. While there are studies, which is a very general understanding and conventional logic, that a higher expertise rival would deter people in engaging. So it will reduce the user engagement. So what happens in the online digital competing platforms? That creates a space to do this research. Besides this expertise about others also, we found a theoretical dilemma, because there is one information about others. Many of you joining are researchers. I'll translate in the research world for you. There's an information about someone currently performing a performance in 2025, number of publications someone has made in 2025, which is current performance in some way. And then there is a stellar thing that you are in this Stanford list or you are superstar. Like in IS area, we all know Venkatesh. So this paper can be a future Venkatesh paper, or this is a Venkatesh TAM kind of research, a sort of a status attribution. And then there is an attribution of past performance, that this paper is on good trajectory. It has received these many citations, or this researcher is received this many citation. So do you see this difference, that there is a relative expertise, which is a status symbol, like being the goat, or being the god in cricket, being expert, being master or super champion. So these are the status attributions. While there is a past performance, this person has performed and won most of the games, won 10 games out of the past, and then the current performance going on this series, they've just won 2 game out of 5 and things like that. So then these are 3 different signals that we were seeing, and 3 different information on the expertise. The literature in organizational behavior area was in some way moving towards the argument that status, which is a relative attribution, and performance, which is a more absolute information, are different, are interpreted differently by the users and the people who engage with that. But are they interpreted differently? And in the digital space, we don't know. So that's where this developed our research interest. So we had this research question, which is how relative and absolute information signal about the rival expertise influence the focal user engagement, given the rival current performance, because performance current as an expertise is something which you can view and observe, and it's also available onto the most of the digital platforms. Now, I'm spending time in convincing you all that status is relative and performance is absolute, because that's what we have to spend time in convincing the reviewers also. So here comes the reviewer review handling part. And if you will read the paper, you'll see we have spent good amount of time making a table and saying that in these previous studies, these are the ways previous researchers have looked at the status signal in a relative manner, while performance has been looked at in a more absolute manner. For example, the study by Merton, and they have investigated the researchers in a field, an academic space, and they said that the status is attributed to Nobel Prize, while the count of discovery is actually performance, which is both of these are different. One thing is relative. You are a Nobel Prize winner, or you have discovered something in the past. Similarly, Malta's paper on wine, which is about long-standing reputation belonging to a particular region or type of wine, vis-a-vis the quality rating, which is the absolute rating that this year experts have got together, and they rated this wine in this absolute numbers. So this is a past performance, while this is a wine which belongs to this region. I might be bad in pronouncing the Chardonnay region and things like that, and that gets a higher status. So you can see that one thing is relative, which is giving a kind of information about expertise of thing, while other is a more absolute thing. But both of them communicate the expertise, which is in some way related to the past thing, while another is the current performance. Similarly, there are many other studies who have done similar operationalization of status and performance, status being relative, like eminent position holding, while count of previous publication, number of certificates which someone has achieved, which is a count performance, while where they are they apprentice or they are master, a rank label or a status label. So with this literature review, we established that status is relative in previous research, while the performance is absolute signal. And then we again situated our research question, which is there. So we are interested in the same thing. before the first round of revision and after that also. But this was one thing which we had to spend time convincing the reviewers how the relative and absolute information signal affect the user engagement given current performance, but are these two signal different? So we showed that via literature review. I'll come back to something else, which is in the third round of revision. This, let me tell that. This literature review was also in some way not sufficient. We also have to conduct an experiment onto the prolific to convince the reviewer that in our context, which is mobile gaming, the way we are operationalizing status, it's considered relative, and way we are operationalizing performance is considered relative by the people. So I'll talk about it and give more details later, but that's also another thing. So looking for the ways of establishing your research and theory and looking for ways on proving that empirically also that this makes sense. This is what we are telling is valid empirically and theoretically both. We are able to translate the constructs from the theoretical world to the empirical world, at least relevant to our context, which is mobile gaming for now. So with that detail, the first round of study or the overall base of the study, what we have actually done. We are interested in this research question on status and performance and current expertise and the user engagement. How do we look at it? Again, we had access to mobile game, which was on English again. So what this mobile game does is you play a 5 round mobile game. In every new game, you're matched with a random opponent. And then once you're matched with a random opponent, you have the option of continuing. So like you're matched with me, Ayushi, or you're matched with Professor Mayank. We both are on this app. And once you're said that you are matched with this, you have option of continuing the game or exiting the game. Once you continue, you play 1 round. Within every round, you have option of exiting and continuing the game. You have both of these on the screen. Let me show you, then it will become more clear. So suppose you install this app. It will tell you you're playing against Rohan. You continued. And then it says, this is a first round. It's a word game. Education. Again, GRE word list, Barron's list. That was a base of this. So it shows you this list of different words and then says, attack your opponent with one of these words. So you have option of choosing any of these words from the list randomly selected with random level of difficulty and things like that. You select a word and that word is shown, as you can see on the screen. It shows that you can choose a word for sour, harsh, or severe. And then there are 4 different options. So this happens to you, like your opponent has chosen one of the word from this screen. And I would say that sometimes I often get confused. I did prepare for the Barron's list some point in my life, but you can see that there's this 4 words, and one of this word would have actual meaning as sour, harsh, or severe. So that was a word which your opponent has selected for you. You had selected some similar word, and this kind of screen would be shown to your opponent. So this is like a 1 round of attack and play. And once you are done and your opponent is done, it will tell you you got it right or opponent got it wrong. You got it wrong. Definitely me playing, and my opponent got it right. My name was Try1, so my opponent got the score of 1 and I got score of 0. And then after seeing this, I get this correct answer and I have option of whether I want to continue or I want to exit the game and things like that. So this is the base of the mobile application that we have. And within that, we designed this randomized field experiment. Now, as you can see on screen, you are only shown your current performance. So we have to do an experiment where we show the opponent not just the current performance, but also the information about the expertise of the rival. Expertise in a manner of status or the past performance. So we looked at literature and we operationalized status, as you can now say in a relative manner. What is relative? Whether your opponent is at gold level, silver level, bronze level, or your percentiles are also relative. We don't know how many answers you got correct in your CAT GMAT, but you know your percentile. So it's a relative signaling. While you can know the exact performance of someone, which is number of wins in last 5 games, or the sequence of wins, like win, win, lose, and things like that. So you can see that this were our operationalization of status, which is percentile, past performance, which is the percentile or the level, lexical hierarchy, as you can say, gold, silver, bronze, medal attributed to any player, very common in games in competitive setting. And then the past performance is number of wins and games and outcomes. Now, this is in the paper in a follow-up study, but I like to tell this here because I wanted to talk about the review journey also with you. As I mentioned that we had to do literature review and situate that, we also had to do follow-up experiment. Um, to convince that yes, we are saying that status is relative and status is operationalized in a relative manner in the similar way we are doing. But is in our context, participants are interpreting it in a similar manner, or people who play the games are interpreting in similar manner? So we went to do a follow-up study in a prolific, but I'm trying to present it here also because I want to convince you all also that yes, status the way we are presenting is considered relative and performance is an absolute signal. So once I talk more about experiment and our findings, you are convinced, like the reviewers, that this makes sense. And these two signals are actually different. These two informations are different. They are not interpreted in same or similar manner. So we recruited participant from Prolific and we showed them screen like this. You can see right one is actually the absolute, the relative signal of status, that Ranveer's level is silver. While playing against Ranveer, Ranveer's last win is 3 on 5. So we had these screen mock-ups which are from our original, from a main study. And then we showed the screen to the participants. We recruited participants who do play game and tried ensuring that they are similar to the cohort with which we have done our main study. And then we asked them to select the screens which they feel would help them in relatively positioning the player among the pool of other players. Relative positioning, relative expertise. And yes, prima facie, we did note it that our operationalization is making sense, which convinced the reviewer that yes, most people relied on status signal. They selected this. We given them option of selecting the both also. And then we also had an open-ended question that if you have selected this, justify your answer, like why you have done it. Luckily, most of the people filled their response. And then me and one more research associate read all of those responses and we did the coding. So qualitative coding, we identified from the responses whether they are, when they're attributing their reasoning, are they attributing it to the relativeness or the absoluteness of locating people as their position in terms of the other players, other pool of the players. So we attributed every response as relative or absolute. We had the information which they selected. And when me and my RA was doing the coding, we ensured inter-rater reliability, Cohen's d, and other things. And that you can see on the paper. We resolved our conflicts. We had more than 80% agreement. And with that, we went to see the correlation between the status as a response selection and relative in their reasoning. And we found significant correlation, that a significant association, that convinced the reviewers that yes, in theoretically status is relative, and in our operationalization, the way we are operationalizing it by showing the uh, lexical hierarchy of silver gold or showing the percentile, it's actually relative, while performance is the absolute signal of the expertise. So I hope now you're convinced. Let's come back to the experiment design. So what happened in our experiment? If you remember, this was the screen. You are playing against Rohan and then you choose a word, you attack your opponent, you get attacked by, you answer and then you get a final result of that round. So you are seeing that we are displaying information about Rohan at two places. When you are matched with that, or you're saying you're playing against, and then you get information, you got it right or Rohan got it wrong. So these are the two places where you have detail on opponent. And those are the two screens which we leveraged to show our players, our users, our participants, the information on the opponent's expertise, whether it's status if they are in that group. So there comes a randomization. That means we randomly assign. So those who newly install the app, we assign them either to the no information group or to the status signal group or to the performance signal group. Within the status signal group also, either you are into the lexical hierarchy group, that means you will see status as gold, silver, bronze, or you will see the status in terms of the percentile. If your performance, you will see performance as WL or sort of a win streak, which we call it, or you will get the absolute value of the performance, as you can see on screen, 3 on 5. So both the operationalization, but not confusing the user. So that means if you are in lexical hierarchy status group, you will only get to see your opponent in terms of gold, silver, and bronze. If you are in percentile, you will only see the percentile. As you can see on the screen, that Ravina we showed as a percentile, for Kangna we showed that as a win streak, win, lose, and things like that. So the basic operationalization was new users of this mobile app. This is an Android mobile app. How do we acquire users? We run Google Ads about this mobile application. And all the new users who installed, we had this inbuilt thing developed into the mobile application where the randomization happens the moment you install the app. So that means you are in control group or a status or performance treatment group. And within status and performance treatment group, you're either in lexical hierarchy group or into the percentile group, or you are in the win streak group or the actual performance group. So you can see that there's this whole work going on in terms of this. But once we do that, we need to establish that they are random. That is one of the most important thing. And again, we relied on the fact that we can, the moment someone install the app, we can collect information from them. So what kind of information we can collect from the people? We can collect their gender, we can collect their age, we can collect their motivation, competitive and learning motivation, and their expertise in the English, same as the previous one, and the purpose of using this mobile application. And then we showed that users across these three cohort are in fact random, or they are similar. There's no association between the group assignment randomly, which happens when someone installs the app, vis-a-vis their user or pre-characteristics which they fill in the survey. We had such 431 users who were assigned to these groups, and then we collected the data on their engagement with the mobile app. So we had more than 70,000 observations. And then, as you can see, this is something which I've in some way explained, that we had these status tiers, low, moderate, and high status, bronze, silver, and gold. We had the information on the performance. Here we did a little bit of operationalization into the three tiers, because those who won 0 and 1 games, we said they are low performance, 2 to 3 moderate, 4 and 5 are high performance. So this is one of our independent variable. We captured information on rival correct answer. We captured information on whether they continued after the round, player correct answer, prior game count, and things like that. The another part is that, which we mention in more detail in our thing, it becomes challenging into the digital space to actually match a player to an opponent in the real time. So we had the opponent which was actually automated. So, but we never disclose. We automate the opponent as realistic as we can. We have gone into length in the appendix detailing how we programmed the opponent by going through gaming literature. That means response of opponent was delayed with the random number of time. The opponent did mistakes in the random sequence. The opponent's performance was not linked to the win streak which was displayed about them. So these are the kind of things we have gone into to ensure that a user feels that opponent is actually, when they're playing against Rohan, they're actually playing against Rohan. And these were again the details which were asked to us, and we had to spend appendix detailing the whole process. But the process of operationalization was something we had done beforehand from the allied discipline and gaming literature to be sure that when we are putting opponents as a bot or a program thing, how realistic we can go and what all we can learn from the studies to make our opponent realistic, because we don't want this unrealistic thing to affect the user engagement. Rather, we want user only to focus on status, past performance, and expertise, because those are our variable of interest. That should determine whether they would like to engage or not. I can get into more details later if you have the questions around that and things. But now moving forward, you can see that we had collected these data. We had the information on the game, the descriptives at the game level. So few things are interesting, that things were going on fine. The status tier which was displayed to the people, they were getting low, medium, and high, all the three status tier. They were getting the opponents which are across three performance level. People played as high as 85 games, while most of the users have at least played 4 games. So for every user, we have sufficient data and we have large panel. This is just to show that information. We also ensured this randomization where we had this competitive motivation and learning motivation. And we wanted to be sure the number of games which people have played. Because we are making them play a game against different opponents with different status or different performance, there's no association between the motivation which is there. So user level randomization and the game level randomization also. This also becomes important in planning the studies. We often think of one level of randomization, but when we are designing an experiment which is hierarchical, we need to think of ensuring randomization at every step till we reach to a stage where we are actually capturing our independent and dependent variable. So you see our users are assigned to app, that's app level thing. Then within that they play a game. So games level randomization is also important. And that's what we showed here, that there's no association between motivation. In fact, we showed that in English efficiency also there's no association between the opponent status and past performance with the motivations which are there. Then what we did after that, we also ensured that the number of games with, or the proportion of games which someone has played is not having any bearing of the expertise. So one is that the games which they get, the opponents which the people get assigned to, but then the users start playing the game, there's a cold start problem. The moment you are shown an expert, or you might exit. But again, we are not interested in that. We want to rule out the cold start problem. We are only interested in the time when users start seeing the information signal and engage with the current performance and status. Then that's the effect we are capturing. So we again showed that proportion of games played is also not having any bearing on status tier, percentile, performance, and all of these interactions. That means, again, to repeat, at the user level, at the game level, we ensure the randomization, app level, game level, and within that, the number of games played also. After doing all that, and these were the things which were developing over the rounds, and I can talk again in detail about it. So we had only the first and second randomization. The last one of the cold start problem came in the second round of revision. So now when we are designing the further studies, we are more careful about this aspect. So with this, again to repeat, we have 3 different, in some way, groups: a control group, somebody who sees the status information, and some users who see the past performance signal. And then we are capturing whether they are continuing the game after a particular round or not. And we are trying to understand whether their intention to continue, their action to continue is depending on the rival status tier, if they're shown the status, interaction between the current performance and rival status tier, or the past performance, absolute signal, and the interaction between the rival current performance and the past performance. What are our findings? So we found that the one thing which is very intuitive, that if opponent gets the correct answer, that means there's a good correct performance, it will deter the user to engage in the digital space. So player correct answer, the rival correct answer has a negative effect on users intention to continue the game. But the interesting part came with the status and performance. You can see we didn't found largely direct effect of status and performance, except low status uh, having some bearing on the user, low status opponent having some bearing on user engagement. But what we found is that there is a contingent effect of the opponent's status being shown or the opponent past performance being shown onto the effect of the rival's correct performance, or to the onto the opponent or rival's correct answer or correct performance. To simply say that rivals current performance deters user to engage, and this deterrence is also contingent on what information we displayed about the rival, not just what information, whether it's status or past performance, in what level of information we displayed. We didn't found contingent effect of low status or moderate status. We found only high status has the contingent effect. So high status rival, when you display that this rival is high status and their performance is not linked to their high status, which is what we ensured. When we show the high status along with the current high performance, it deters user to engage. But we didn't found the similar effect of the past performance or in terms of performance signaling. So status signal, when it's high, it's amplifying the effect of the immediate performance. No similar thing for the performance signal. So these are separate. Status signal amplifies, while the performance signal, when performance is high, low, it doesn't matter. But when it's moderate, in some way confusing whether they are doing well or not, it makes people look at the correct answers and then disengage more when your rival is performing better. So you can see that these two have different mechanism to operate. Status amplifies the effect of current performance, while while the past performance signal, which is more absolute signal, doesn't have similar effect. Rather, when it's confusing, whether it's moderate, whether it's not signaling anything, it make users focus more on the immediate information which is available to them. There's no substitution, this in some way, no substitution effect in the status while it's there in performance, and status has the amplification effect. So, and then we showed this in the help of the graph also, which you can see that in the left side there is a high status. When the rival is of high status, there is a more slope, and the discouraging users to continue is higher, while in the case of the right side of graph, for the performance, for low and high performance, we don't see that effect, but for the moderate performance, we see effect similar to the status, that it discourages user to engage. Like any paper nowadays with econometric thing, we did many robustness check. We had the status threshold. So now, if you remember, we had the percentiles. We discretized them into the three thresholds: low, medium, and high status. We did two different alternative discretization of the status signal. I can get into detail of those. Then we used the logic model. We have used the probit model also. We have used the linear probability and then checked that more than 95% predictions are within the range of 0 and 1. There are some people who have played many games, as you can see, 85 games, but mean games are 4.3. So we removed the outliers, the users who have played more than 2 standard deviation of the game and less than 2 standard deviation, and then we used those, and our findings remain robust. For the main study, we didn't look at the we didn't control for the previous game correct answer, but then it has an effect, because it's kind of a, your performance also affects your immediate performance, also affects your engagement. But when we are looking at your immediate performance, that means we are reducing our the whole observations that we're using for analysis. So we present this as a robustness analysis with the smaller data that once we looked at, we controlled for the previous game correct answer. That means less number of observation where user actually played one game and got the correct answer, incorrect answer. That correct answer has positive effect, but our main qualitative wise, our finding that effect of status, effect of correct performance of rival, effect of high status rival, um, in interaction with the correct performance, effect of moderate status, moderate performance, effect on the current performance. These two things remain qualitatively similar across all of these robustness tests. Then after that, and this is a part where we are presenting or we are trying to work with the mechanism, and then we say that future researchers have to investigate more on it. We do have, but that's an interesting thing which we also found. We found the effect of status. We are saying that status and performance operate differently. If they're operating differently, then there may be some underlying reason. So we started looking at, we do have players' motivation. What happens with the players' motivation? We have player motivation on to compete, which we take on survey. We also have player motivation to learn from this app. So learning motivation and competing motivation, which we ask for every user. And there also we found that in some way it is substantiating our argument that status and performance operate differently. Because what we found when we interact the status correct answer with the motivation signal, we see the effect of competitive motivation, but we don't see the effect of learning motivation on interaction with status. That means high motivation opponents, the effect of status, high competitive motivation users, the effect of the high status rival, deterring them to engage is more stronger. While in low status, it is not that strong. And we didn't found any comparable result of competitive motivation or learning motivation on the past performance signal. So basically, motivation and the competitive motivation operates as a mechanism enhancing the effect of the high status in the case of high motivation player, but the learning motivation has no similar effect, and none of the motivation, whether it's competitive or learning, has implications for the past performance signals. So with this whole thing, what are the key sort of contributions and implications of a study? So one thing, we studied the user engagement in a context which is let's study it, which is competitive setting. Then we theoretically established that status and performance are different, and then we contribute by saying that these two signals operate differently when given as information about rival in the digital competing space. They both have the effect of these are not direct, rather these information signal have contingent effect on the user, provided they are also engaging with the current performance information. And then with the help of motivation, we are also able to establish the boundary condition that one type of motivation, which is competing motivation, enhances the contingent effect of status, while no similar effect on the performance and no similar effect for learning motivation. So in some way, we are talking about the boundary condition also. And then this is having implication for practitioners, because when you design a mobile app, you have possibility of knowing the users. You know for what motivation they are there. You also have possibility of displaying the information about the rivals. And what do platform want? They want user to engage more. So that means they need to be dynamic in displaying the information about the rivals. And that's one of our implication, that you can't display status information or performance information uniformly to every user. Rather, you have possibility of checking their motivations and then customizing your display around the motivation of the user and what kind of information you would like to display, whether it's status or past performance, what level of status. If someone is very high status, you might not like to show that if you want users to engage more in the digital competitive settings. So this was this work. And after that, in the same paper, we propose that when we are doing the study with this opponent, we have this programmed opponent which user don't know as a program opponent. So they are engaging with, they reduce their engagement with high status program opponent. But what happens when we tell the user? Because now everyone knows at the current time that you are engaging with bots and programmed users in digital space. Like as a researcher now, when we are collecting the survey data, also we are concerned whether it's a bot filling our survey or it's the human being filling our survey. So we are concerned about this thing, about user being programmed or a human. So what happens when we disclose this? This is our further study, and I'm not putting the findings here, but I want to share with you all verbally. So what we are finding in the follow-up study, what we have done is we proposed this in the paper in the end, and then we started parallelly working on it. We disclose to the user whether opponent is a programmed opponent, whether opponent is AI or bot, and we say from the literature that people engage with human more because they feel humans are uncertain. Even though you feel someone is good, you might, some human is good, but you still have some uncertainty. But the moment programmed opponent is there, which is bot, there's an aspect of certainty that this opponent being programmed will be predictable. So then programmed opponent will reduce the user engagement. But then there are studies which are saying that program opponent is bot. But what if we tell that it's an AI, a human-like AI? So you're playing against Rohan.ai, which reduces the uncertainty because AI is said to be more human-like, which we are now hearing with all of these AGI debates and other things. So will it actually reduce uncertainty in the digital space and make users engage more? And our findings are no. Users, the moment they are disclosed that you're playing with a program opponent, you are uncertain. But then how do we engage users with the programmed opponent? There comes this information signal of status and display. So there we have found that if we introduce uncertainty by showing the opponent having uncertain status, that means moderate status, that makes user engage more with the programmed rival, which is AI or bot rival. So this is our current study, which is uh, under progress of draft writing and things like that. And with this, I'll close in some way my monologue and happy to take up the question. For now, I'll stop sharing my screen. Thank you so much for patiently listening.
Thank you, Professor Ayushi, for sharing your journey, along with sharing information, the journey, including having the practitioners on board, right? And not just presenting the paper, but the entire context and also some of the subsequent work that you are doing. Right. So I think we have a lot of questions in the chat box. Yeah, I'll request Mr. Venkatesh to moderate that.
Sure. Divya, you had a question. Would you like to speak up and ask the question? So let me ask the question on behalf of Divya. The question is, please share the challenges faced in designing and executing the experiments and how you tackle them. This is a question from Divya Divedi, who is a PhD scholar from IIM Bangalore.
He just
Thank you.
graduated.
Oh,
She
lovely.
graduated.
So congratulations, Dr. Divya. I look forward to meeting you. And that's a very, very interesting and a very relevant question. There are few challenges which I've highlighted. One thing I would say that being practitioners on board made a lot of things simpler for us. But the challenge came to us, the two ways of challenge. One is that if you're submitting to the FT or basket, senior scholar basket, I would say be prepared for doing the rework or re-execution of experiment contingent on what your reviewers ask you to do. So that is something you should be sure of. And that involves challenge, which is a monetary challenge also, because we have gone with acquiring user via Google Ads. So budgeting for that and being ready for that aspect is one of the challenge. And I'm telling that because it becomes more challenge in Indian academia and here also, that you need to have a budget for a whole set of experiment and plan for a follow-up experiment. If you cannot do experiment with the app, Prolific and other things comes in handy. So look at the reviewer's comment and how you can operationalize them, if not with your main experimental setup, but with the help of platforms like Prolific and Mechanical Turk and things like that. Because we face these challenges. At the third round, we can't go back and do one more set of experiment because of cost and time involved, but we can leverage the Prolific. So you have to be proactive about that. And sometimes challenge will sound that it requires empirical change, but rather it will be more theoretical. So sharing your work and presenting your work to the senior scholars within India and taking the inputs will help you translate the language of a reviewer, which even something I found very valid. That there's a very interesting workshop happening in IIT Madras in January. So I've attended and presented in my Times these paper and I still keep on doing. So presenting your work to the peers when it's in certain round and taking their help in translating the reviewer's feedback also come in handy. In terms of design and execution of an experiment, one thing is very critical, that when you're doing an experiment, you be sure that your previous users are not having any spillover on the new user acquisition that you're doing. So your new user for which you're doing a study should be clean, and you can if possible have access to the prior data of the platform, which will help you in seeing the initial interactions and planning your experiments much better. So we learn from our first study and then we operationalize this in the further studies, that we always ask for the initial data if we can engage with that, and then use that to understand, besides the literature, what are the factors which can have effect on user engagement, and fill in that in designing our main experiment study. I hope I answer your question, Divya. If you have anything follow up, happy to discuss.
Divya, you can speak. You are a panelist now, if you would like to speak. Okay. Earlier on, Manisha, who is also a PhD scholar from IIM Bangalore, had a question. This is towards the challenges in convincing the practitioners to participate as well as in implementing an experiment. So she found it difficult, so wants you to share your experience.
Um, Thank you. And I agree to that. I would say that it's a hit and miss, but hits are really great if you're able to convince that. So I would say put efforts in that direction. Uh, if you will talk to 10 practitioners, maybe two will come on board. The other thing which I would say is that as a researcher, our timelines are very long. So you would need to have something for the practitioners in between. Like in my other work where I'm doing virtual reality and related thing with practitioners, I often try to churn out practitioner relevant papers also, or a quick papers presenting in conference which my practitioner colleague can go and present also, and then having a long term plan for myself. So I have found these things helpful, and once you start signaling with your co-authors and other things that you are a practitioner friendly person, uh, I think it becomes much more easier. The another challenge with practitioner is ethics and IRB review. And I would say that be very sure of that and don't falter on that, because journals are asking that. So we both of these studies had the IRB approval, even though it takes time, how data would be handled, how data would be stored, data privacy. And I know IIM Bangalore has a good IRB committee, so those who are working there in many other institutes, there are some challenges with some institutes around IRB, but at least have a consent and data related things documented with your practitioners. That will help you in convincing the reviewers of the top journal that you have taken care of ethics, data protection, data privacy, and many other things. So having a discussion, open discussion around that aspect would also help. And that's for the Divya also, that's another challenge which we face with the practitioners around the data privacy and data sharing. So having a good ethics committee on board or having a good process of documenting the data, working around with data consents, user age, and other implications always helps in executing these kind of studies.
So, Professor, would you have any more questions? We may get some questions offline. Hope Professor Tandon is okay to receive some questions by mail later.
Sure,
Okay.
I'll be happy to receive the question. I'll drop my email address is available there. I'll also drop my Trinity email address on the chat. And happy to connect on LinkedIn also to take up the questions.
Now
There is
we
one
have
question in chat. Maybe after that, I'll have one question for Professor Ayushi. So finish that question. Yeah.
we have Professor Daya asking a question. Professor Daya, I would make you a panelist. Professor Daya, you are a panelist now. You may unmute yourself and speak.
Thank you for the very nice talk and organizing such excellent lecture. My problem is that many of the students facing problem for high impact journal publication, because these days most of the journal has become open access. So they are demanding huge money, and they have not much money to publish their paper. So I think there must be some provision from the institute, every institute, and they have libraries, so librarian can arrange some money to just provide this publication charges, a lump sum for a whole institute, so that people can publish a high impact factor. So what is your views, and can you enlighten some ideas?
Thank you, Professor Dea. And that's a very valid challenge globally. There's one thing which I would say, that at least management journals and IAS journals, they do have open access, but they also have the behind open access, and sometimes we have to live with it. This paper is not open access because I was from the private university, and I was not having, when I published this, and I was not having fundings for article processing charges. And I am of a researcher who's a belief that I need to budget for my experiment, so I can't budget for paying the APC charges. The workaround often is, if you want your work to be shared, is presenting a part of it in conference, and that gives the visibility to your paper, which can give the visibility to your behind paywall paper also, because conference often makes proceedings in some way more open as compared to the journal. So that's one suggestion which I always give to my students. But going to your problem of APCs being with the help of library, with the help of national support, is something we really should be asking, and we should work in that direction. But till that things come, I would not say students to be discouraged in targeting high impact journals or anyone, because the cost is a bigger problem with terms of data collection. The open access is a way to give visibility to your research, but at least for now, unlike the medical journals where they're often the medical informatics and all, there's more journals which are definitely open access and they need article processing charge. IAS and few management journals are not mandatorily open access, and that way we are in much positive space. I do understand the limitation of many other domains. My finance colleagues face a lot of struggle in getting the APC and any other payment, and that's where I hear you, and I am with you in arguing and asking for more support in such direction.
Because I myself also this time face some problems. So Shanghai University, they have paid for my publication that impact factor is 11.8. So they have $1,800 they have paid for the publication purpose, because my paper was very good, so they have paid Shanghai University. So in this way, I think there should be some budget, research budget for the student and faculty in the institute library, because I have seen in the library there are many unnecessary books and unnecessary journals they are subscribing, nobody is reading. So maybe this will be the good practice to encourage the student and faculty to publish their work in the high visibility journal and impact factor. I think this is my idea and my thinking. Other people may think different. Okay, thank you. Thank you for your
Thank you.
comment and answering.
So any further questions you will share with
Because I
Professor
think just one
Kandan?
thing, if you can throw some light on this, because what you started with, that you are a qualitative and interpretive researcher, making that entire epistemological shift towards an experimental study and getting that published in ISR, right? Uh, how did you navigate this conflict? I'm sure you would have had that conflict, right? Epistemologicals. How did it help you? Did it challenge you? How did you navigate that?
I would say I still live in that conflict, Professor Mayank. I am learned qualitative research from the colleagues like you all who are publishing good qualitative interpretive research. So when I have to work, and I do keep on working, I'm working on design justice and other aspect. So I always live in this dilemma of two heads. One is ontologically being critical, and other is trying to look at positive as an economic implication. But how I try to convince myself is one thing. I say that I'll work in a specific domain, empirical domain. So I always say my interests are in user engagement, in health and education. Now, ontologically, it doesn't matter if it's user engagement. I would be interested in understanding that and implications of user engagement. It can be economic implications, which we study via experiment and things like that, or it can be a social justice implication where methods like yours, qualitative ethnography and critical reflection makes much more sense. So I try to put on these two heads. When I face the challenge, what I try to do is, which is a continuous challenge, I try to prepare myself by reading that set of papers that day or that hour, and then work on that type of research for those days, and then later on switch to the other aspect. But largely, I'm convincing myself that my interests are in user engagement, digital platform, and I will try to understand it from method agnostic ways. When I have questions on why, what implications, I will go to call. And this also helps me because I've realized that once I'm sensitive about the user implications and I'm designing experiment, I'm also talking a lot about ethics and design and other things to my co-authors, which always feeds into your experiment design. So I would say it's a benefit to be a method agnostic researcher nowadays and be a mixed method researcher. It it will take time to do that, and we shouldn't try to excel in all the aspects. So we
I
can
must
deliver
compliment you.
in either.
You are an example for that discussion that no, we shouldn't be paradigm warriors. No, what matters is the research question, the phenomena that we are interested in. Not trying to to close ourselves with any one of the paradigms or thought process, right? So thank you for being that, and I hope that you will not just publish in ISR or similar papers, but also hope to see one ethnographic work getting published from you very soon. Right? Yeah. So
Thank you.
maybe
Thank you so much.
we can close the session now, Mr. Venkatesh, right? And
Yes, yes, Professor.
to all the
Yes,
audience
we
for joining.
can. Yes, with everybody's permission, we'll close. And thanks everybody for joining. And if we don't see you in any other events, Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to all. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks, Professor.